Great. Thanks very much, Allison. It's what a great pleasure it is to be here. I found out about this event about 24 hours ago. So I'm so glad I did and that I could be part of this, partly because I want to hear from the experts that you're going to hear from in just a very few minutes. I thought for my comments, I'd start off with a quiz. So if you don't mind, let me read something to you, and I'd like you to tell me who said this. Mental illnesses occur more frequently, affect more people, require more prolonged treatment, cause more suffering by the families of the affected, waste more of our human resources, and constitute more financial drain upon both the public treasury and the personal finances of the individual families than any other single condition. Terrific, thank you. No one said Donald Trump, which I'm really glad. So it was one of the last speeches given by JFK, February 5th, 1963. And I think that's the right response. Wow, you know, it's been over 50 years. And in that time, we still find ourselves with these words having even more truth than they did in 1963. At this point in time, the set of disorders like schizophrenia and depression and PTSD, OCD and eating disorders collectively are the largest single source of disability from all medical causes. Just extraordinary. So it's, as we say in public health, the highest burden of disease, partly because they start early in life. Unlike most medical disorders, mental disorders start almost always before age 50, and actually 50% of the time in adolescence, 75% of the time by age 25. So that's very different than heart disease, cancer, diabetes, for the most part. And it isn't just the high prevalence and the early onset, but it's the fact that they are often so disabling for a whole variety of reasons, and in some cases, unfortunately, actually fatal. So most people don't realize this, but suicide is actually far more common than homicide in this country. There are about 41,000 suicides every year, about 1 every 15 minutes in the United States. That's relative to about 16,000 homicides. There are more deaths from suicide than from almost any form of cancer except breast cancer and colon cancer. There are more deaths from suicide than AIDS, traffic fatalities, prostate cancer, just almost any of the major sources of mortality you might think about. So I became really interested in this problem and had the opportunity to run the, as Allison mentioned, the federal agency that oversees research on mental illness, and I did that for 13 years. And I got into this basically to try to figure out why we had made so little progress, why it was that Kennedy's call to arms in 1963 was still as true when I took the job in 2003. And what really struck me was that in those intervening years, we had made so much progress in so many areas. We had certainly seen the end of polio, we'd seen the end of most of the major measles epidemics, things like AIDS had come and almost gone, that AIDS had become a chronic disease instead of a death sentence. There were so many examples of extraordinary progress in medicine. The fact that life expectancy itself since 1963 had gone about 20, 25 years, 63% reduction in cardiovascular death during that time. So we had made so much progress in so many areas. And what happened here? That people with these brain disorders, these very severe mental disorders, were not even in the medical system. They tended to be homeless, they tended to be incarcerated. Often they tend to be shut in. They tend to be every place except where they can get good treatment. They are the severely poor, they're the homeless, they're the disenfranchised, they're the broken people often in our society. And I've been trying to figure out why that was and thinking a lot about other places where we had made progress. And I began to think as the years went on in my tenure in public service in Washington that actually, in so many ways, the plight of people with serious mental illness was really not just a serious public health problem, but it actually began to feel like a civil rights problem, and maybe, in fact, the civil rights problem of this decade, that this whole group of people, as Allison mentions, millions of Americans, were simply outside of the system. And I began to think that what we needed, as President Kennedy realized a long, long time ago, was sort of a revolution, just as we had for the civil rights movement. We really needed a call to arms. We needed to think about how we could change the outlook for people with these disorders. The revolution needs to be a revolution in science, where we begin to understand these as brain disorders, a revolution in policy, where we begin to ensure that there's high quality care and that the care you get for depression is every bit as good as the care you'd get for diabetes or heart disease. But also a revolution in the way we think about this and the way we talk about it. What's so extraordinary is how we are able to talk about diabetes and heart disease and AIDS and cancer, and still we can't talk about mental illness. As Allison mentioned, every one of us is affected. Some people have said there are really only two kinds of people in the world. They're the kinds who have been affected by a mental illness, either in themselves or someone they love, and the kind who will be affected, because it just hasn't happened yet. It's that common. Every one of us has a stake in this, and yet none of us are talking about it. It's still a taboo subject, and as long as we can't talk about it, I don't think we're going to be able to make the progress we need to. So tonight, we're in for a real treat, because you're going to hear from people who are going to give you, I think, a very hopeful message. And that hopeful message is that, in fact, this revolution in science is happening, and we are making enormous progress. In fact, we can begin to talk about mental illness, and talking about it does make a difference. And in fact, there's an opportunity for those who live with mental illness to be able to recover and still contribute in some spectacular ways. For me, this whole message is a message that says, these are tough problems, but we can overcome. We can do this. But we need to do it together. We need to do it as something that we, as a society, feel we really care about. It's a community problem, and we need to attack it as a community. So I am so delighted to be able to be here, be part of this, encourage you to join the effort. We need everybody's input, everybody's wisdom. And I think, as you'll hear in the subsequent evenings about this topic, we also need everybody's philanthropy, which will be really important. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to look for Abby, and she's going to take us from this point on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you for joining us. It's now my great pleasure to introduce you to 4 revolutionaries. And we are incredibly honored to have them with us this evening. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Megan Jones. Megan is the Chief Science Officer and founding executive team member of Lantern, and she's assistant professor at Stanford. She's an academic researcher and healthcare entrepreneur passionate about making mental health care more affordable and accessible through intelligent, user-centered design. Next, we have Glenn Close, co-founder of Bring Change to Mind. Glenn is an award-winning actress who's received 6 Oscar nominations, 3 Emmy Awards, 2 Golden Globes, and 3 Tony Awards. In 2009, Glenn's role as a mental health advocate and the idea for Bring Change to Mind evolved out of observing battles with mental illness within her family. Ellen Sachs is a professor of law, psychology, and psychiatry and the behavioral sciences and the director of the Sachs Institute for Mental Health Law, Policy, and Ethics at the USC Gould School of Law. Her memoir, The Center Cannot Hold, My Journey Through Madness, describes her struggles with schizophrenia and her managing to craft a good life for herself in the face of dire prognosis. She's won numerous honors, including a John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Fellowship, also known as the Genius Award. Lauren Frank is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator, co-director at the Kavli Institute for Fundamental Neuroscience, and professor at UCSF. Dr. Lauren Frank's laboratory uses a combination of techniques to study the neural bases of learning, memory, and decision-making. In particular, his work focuses on the hippocampus and related structures, brain areas critical for forming and retrieving memories. So he's going to talk to us quite a lot about the brain and memories. I would now like to invite our speakers to the stage.